It was supposed to be a simple job. A leaky U-bend under a porcelain kitchen sink in a part of town where the houses had names instead of numbers. The Willows, the invoice said. Sounded peaceful. Deceptive. I pulled my van up the crushed gravel driveway, the engine ticking as it cooled in the oppressive quiet. Rain threatened, the sky a bruised purple that promised a downpour. I just wanted to get in, fix the drip, get paid, and get out. An hour, tops. My life was a series of these contained problems, neat little boxes of chaos I could methodically restore to order with a wrench and some sealant. It was the other kind of chaos, the human kind, that I went out of my way to avoid. I grabbed my toolbox, the familiar weight of comfort in my hand, and walked up the stone path. The woman who answered the door was not what I expected. Dr. Alara Vance. The name sounded severe, academic. I'd pictured someone older, sterner, with tweed and sensible shoes. But the woman in the doorway was tall and wore a simple gray cashmere sweater that looked softer than anything I owned. Her hair was a dark wave of silver and black, pulled back loosely, and her eyes were the color of the storm brewing overhead. They held a kind of exhaustion that had nothing to do with being tired. "You must be Alex," she said. Her voice was low, smooth, but with a slight tremor, like a string pulled just a little too tight. "Please, come in." I stepped inside, my work boots feeling clumsy and loud on the polished hardwood floors. The house smelled of old books and lemon oil, a clean, sterile scent that seemed designed to cover something else up. It was beautiful, of course. Everything was in its place. Art on the walls that looked real, furniture that looked like it had never been sat in. It was less a home and more a museum exhibit on what a home should look like. A perfect, silent cage. "The kitchen's this way," she said, leading me through an archway. "It's just a persistent drip. I've put a bowl under it, but the sound is," she trailed off, gesturing vaguely. The sound was driving her mad. I got it. A single, rhythmic drip in a house this quiet would be a form of torture. It's the one thing you can't ignore, a constant reminder that something is broken. I knelt and opened the cabinet under the sink. The bowl was half full. The drip was steady, a fat plink of water every 3 seconds. A corroded seal on the PVC pipe. Easy. An hour was generous. I laid out my tarp, arranged my tools with practiced efficiency. It's a ritual, a way of imposing order before I even begin. Dr. Vance stood a few feet away, her arms crossed over her chest, watching me. Most clients leave. They go into another room, make a phone call, pretend I'm not there. But she stayed, a silent, anxious sentinel. It made the back of my neck prickle. I could feel her gaze on my hands as I worked the wrench. "Do you need me to move?" she asked, her voice startling me. I grunted, my head half inside the dark cabinet. "No, you're fine," but she wasn't. She was a humming wire of tension in the quiet room. I could smell her perfume, something subtle and green, like crushed leaves after a storm. It was distracting. I focused on the threads of the pipe, on the satisfying groan of metal giving way. This was my space. My world of washers and gaskets and things that fit together perfectly. I understood this language. The language of her silent watching, however, was entirely foreign. I slid out from under the sink to grab a new washer from my box. My shoulder brushed her leg as I moved, and she flinched, a tiny, almost imperceptible movement. "Sorry," I mumbled, not looking at her. "It's fine," she whispered, but she took a half step back, creating a distance that felt both necessary and like a disappointment. I hated that I felt that. It was unprofessional. She was a client. A name on an invoice. The Willows. I slid back under the sink, into the familiar darkness, the smell of damp pressboard and rust filling my nose. The drip had stopped. I tightened the final connection, my knuckles scraping against the basin. A small sting of pain to ground me. Just a job, I told myself. Just another broken thing to fix. "Would you like some coffee?" The question came from above me, and I banged my head on the underside of the sink in surprise. A muffled curse escaped me. "Oh, I'm so sorry," she said, her voice laced with genuine alarm. "Are you all right?" I emerged slowly, rubbing the back of my head, my cheeks hot with embarrassment. "Fine. Just, You startled me, my heart was hammering against my ribs. Coffee, she repeated, her hands fluttering at her sides as if she didn't know what to do with them. I've just made a fresh pot, I should have said no. I should have said, no thank you, ma'am. I'll just finish up here, write you the bill, and be on my way. That was the script. That was the boundary. But I looked at her, really looked at her, for the first time. The perfect composure was a thin veneer over something shattered. Her eyes were pleading, not for me to have coffee, but for me not to leave her alone in this silent, perfect house. The storm had broken outside, rain lashing against the kitchen window. Leaving now felt like casting someone adrift. Yeah, I heard myself say. Coffee sounds good. She gave me a small, grateful smile that transformed her face, softening the harsh lines of her anxiety. It was a beautiful smile. I felt a lurch in my stomach that had nothing to do with hitting my head. While she poured 2 mugs, my hands felt clumsy as I packed away my tools. The job was done. The drip was silenced. My purpose here was technically complete. We sat at the small breakfast table, the rain drumming a frantic rhythm on the roof. The coffee was black and strong, and the heat of the mug felt good in my hands. We didn't speak for a few minutes, just listened to the storm. The silence felt different now. Less sterile, more shared. You're very good at what you do, she said finally, her gaze fixed on the swirling steam from her mug. Methodical, I like fixing things, I said, the words sounding stupidly simple. It makes sense. There's a problem, you find the cause, you apply the solution. It's neat, she looked up at me then, and her eyes were dark with a sadness so profound it felt like I was looking into a deep well. Not everything is so neat, she said quietly. No, I agreed, my throat suddenly tight. It's not. We lapsed back into silence, but the air between us was charged with everything unsaid. I knew I should be making moves to leave. The professional part of my brain was screaming at me, telling me to stand up, hand her the bill, and walk out the door. But my feet felt nailed to the floor. I felt anchored by her loneliness, by the unspoken plea I'd seen in her eyes. I was a fixer, and I was sitting in front of a woman who was broken in a way I had no tools for. I cleared my throat, the sound unnaturally loud. Well, the sink is all sorted. No more drips. I pushed my chair back, the legs scraping against the floor. It was time to restore the boundary, to become the contractor again. I stood and reached for the invoice pad in my back pocket. Her face fell, the brief warmth from the coffee and conversation draining away, leaving behind that haunted, exhausted look. She looked smaller, suddenly. More fragile. Thank you, she said, her voice barely a whisper. She stood as well, wrapping her arms around her middle as if holding herself together. The thing is, she started, then stopped, biting her lip. She stared at the now silent cabinet under the sink, then back at me. Her gaze was intense, searching. It felt like she was trying to gauge whether I was a person who would walk away or a person who would stay. I waited, my hand frozen on my pocket. The rain hammered down, a relentless assault on the roof. There's a bigger leak upstairs, she said, the words so quiet I almost missed them. I frowned, confused. Another one? You didn't mention it on the phone. Is it a pipe? The roof. My mind immediately went to work, cataloging possibilities, solutions. Water damage, drywall, plaster repair. Tangible problems. Fixable things. She shook her head, a slow, painful motion. A single tear escaped and traced a path down her cheek. She didn't wipe it away. No, she said, her voice thick. Not that kind of leak. My breath caught in my chest. Oh, I understood. The neat, orderly world of pipes and wrenches dissolved, and I was left standing in the middle of her chaos, utterly unequipped. Every instinct screamed at me to run. To make an excuse, to say I don't handle that kind of work, to get in my van and drive away. But I looked at her trembling lip, at the raw despair in her storm-gray eyes, and I couldn't move. I was a fixer, and this was the most broken thing I had ever seen. Show me, I said. The words came out of their own accord, a quiet surrender. She led me up the stairs. Her hand trembled on the polished oak banister. My boots were heavy on the plush runner, each step feeling like a transgression, taking me deeper into a place I didn't belong. The upstairs hallway was lined with closed doors, each one a silent witness. She stopped in front of the last one on the left and hesitated, her hand hovering over the doorknob. She took a deep, shuddering breath, like a diver preparing to plunge into icy water. Then she opened the door. The room was dark, the curtains drawn tight against the storm. But even in the gloom, I could see the shape of the mess. It wasn't water damage. It was life damage. The room was an artist's studio, or it had been. A large easel stood in the center, draped in a dusty white sheet, its form like a ghost. Canvases were stacked against the wall, some blank, others turned to face it, hiding their secrets. The sharp, nostalgic smell of turpentine and oil paint hung in the air, thick with disuse. But it was the boxes that told the real story. Cardboard boxes, half-filled and abandoned. One was overflowing with books on Renaissance art, another with neatly rolled charcoal sketches. A smaller one on a workbench held dozens of tubes of paint, squeezed and exhausted, and a jar thick with brushes, their bristles stiff and dry. This wasn't a leak. This was an amputation. A place where a vital part of a life had been violently stopped. It was my wife's studio, Alara said, her voice hollow in the still air. Anna. She was a painter, was. The past tense hung between us, heavy and suffocating. She's gone. I didn't ask how or when. The details didn't matter. The result was all here, in this suffocating, silent room. The grief was a physical presence, a weight pressing down on my chest, making it hard to breathe. Alara walked over to the sheet-covered easel and touched it, her fingers tracing the outline of the canvas beneath. I haven't been in here in 6 months. I tried to pack it all up. I thought if I could just put it all in boxes, I could contain it. But I can't. It's leaking out. Into the rest of the house. Into me. Her words landed like stones. The perfect house, the sterile quiet, the controlled facade, it was all a dam she had built against this tide of grief. And it was breaking. The kitchen sink had just been the first, most literal crack. I looked around at the abandoned work, the frozen potential. My hands itched for a wrench, for a tool, for something I could do to make it right. But there was nothing. No pipe to tighten, no seal to replace. My entire skill set was useless. I felt a surge of panic, of inadequacy. I should not be here. This was too intimate, too raw. This was a stranger's sacred ground, and I was trespassing. I'm sorry, I said, the words feeling like pebbles against a mountain. I should go. I started to back out of the room. Please, she whispered, turning to face me. Her face was a mask of desperation. Don't. Please don't leave, the plea undid me. It snagged on something deep inside me, the part that recognized her profound loneliness, because it was a mirror of my own. I spent my days in other people's houses, a temporary fixture, always on the outside of their lives. I fixed their homes and went back to my empty apartment. I knew this kind of quiet. I walked back into the room, closing the door softly behind me, shutting out the rest of the house, the rest of the world. We stood in the dim, paint-scented darkness. The only sound was the rain and her ragged breathing. I don't know what to do, she confessed, her voice cracking. Every time I try to touch her things, I can't breathe. It feels like I'm drowning. The metaphor was so perfect it hurt. I saw it then. Her standing in the middle of this room, the memories rising like water around her, pulling her under. And I, a plumber, a fixer of leaks, understood. I walked toward her, my steps slow, deliberate. I didn't have a solution. I didn't have the right words. All I had were my hands. I reached out, not to touch her, but to the sheet on the easel. My fingers hesitated for a second, then I took the corner and pulled. The sheet slid to the floor in a whisper of cotton. The painting on the easel was unfinished. It was a portrait of Alara. She was sitting in the armchair from her living room, a book open in her lap, but she was looking up, a small, private smile on her face. The artist had captured the light from a window, catching the silver in her hair, the intelligence in her eyes, the gentle curve of her mouth. It was a look of pure, unguarded love. The background was just sketched in, the hands holding the book only half-formed, but the face was alive. It was Alara as seen through the eyes of someone who adored her. Alara made a choked sound, a strangled sob, and covered her mouth with her hand. The sight of it, raw and unfinished, was a fresh wound. A story without an ending. She was working on it. Alara wept, her body shaking. It was for my birthday. I stood beside her, my heart aching with a pain that was not my own, but that I felt just as keenly. I could feel the invisible presence of the woman who had wielded these brushes, who had mixed these colors to capture the exact shade of her wife's eyes. This room wasn't a tomb, it was a testament. A testament to a love so big its absence had broken the world. My carefully constructed professional wall, the one I used to keep the chaos of other people's lives from touching mine, didn't just crack. It crumbled into dust. Without thinking, I reached out and put my hand on her arm. Her cashmere sweater was unbelievably soft under my calloused fingers. She flinched at first, then leaned into the touch, a desperate, shuddering weight. Her sob broke free and she turned, burying her face in my shoulder. My work jacket was probably covered in dust and smelled faintly of pipe glue, but she clung to me as if I were a life raft. I wrapped my arms around her, holding her steady as the storm of her grief finally broke. I held her while she cried for her wife, for the unfinished painting, for the silent, empty house. I just held her, my chin resting on the top of her head, my own eyes squeezed shut against the sudden sting of tears. There was nothing to fix. There was only this. Holding the pieces. We stood like that for a long time, until her sobs subsided into trembling breaths. The rain outside softened to a gentle patter. She didn't pull away, and I didn't let go. It felt like if I did, she might drift apart. Her head was tucked under my chin, and I could feel the warmth of her breath through my shirt. It was the most profound intimacy I had ever known, this sharing of sorrow. It was more real than any touch I'd ever been given. Eventually, she stirred, pulling back just enough to look at me. Her face was blotchy, her eyes red-rimmed, but the terrible tension was gone. In its place was a fragile, raw vulnerability. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice hoarse. "You came here to fix a sink." I shook my head, my hand moving from her arm to cup her cheek. Her skin was soft, damp with tears. I wiped one away with my thumb. "Some leaks are more important than others," I said, the words feeling truer than anything I'd ever uttered. Her gaze dropped to my mouth, and the air in the room shifted. The grief was still there, a heavy blanket, but something else sparked underneath it. A flicker of life. Of need. It was a terrifying, beautiful thing to see. I felt it in my own chest, a mirror of her own fragile hope. I knew I should step back. I knew I should let her go, restore the space between us, but I couldn't. My thumb stroked her cheekbone, a slow, comforting rhythm. She closed her eyes, leaning into my touch again, a quiet sigh escaping her lips. This was a line, a point of no return. Crossing it would change everything. It was unprofessional. It was reckless. It was also the only thing that felt real in that moment. I leaned in slowly, giving her every chance to pull away. She didn't. She met me halfway. The kiss was not frantic or desperate. It was soft, hesitant, and tasted of salt and coffee. It was a question and an answer all at once. It was a quiet acknowledgement of the wreckage around us and a decision, for just a moment, to build something new upon it. When we broke apart, we rested our foreheads together, breathing the same air. The smell of turpentine, her perfume, the rain. It was the scent of this moment, a moment that would be seared into my memory forever. Neither of us spoke. There were no words for what had just happened, for the shift from stranger to something else. Something unnameable and fragile. She took my hand, her long, elegant fingers lacing with my shorter, calloused ones. Our hands looked so different, from two separate worlds. But they fit. She led me out of the studio, closing the door gently on the unfinished portrait and the ghost of the woman who had painted it. She didn't lead me downstairs to the front door. She led me to her bedroom. The room was as immaculate as the rest of the house, but it felt different. It felt like hers alone. The bed was large, covered in a simple white duvet. The storm had passed, and a pale, watery light was filtering through the windows, painting stripes across the floor. There, in the quiet aftermath, we found a different kind of solace. It wasn't about forgetting the grief or fixing the brokenness. It was about not being alone in it. Our intimacy was a slow, tender exploration. It was about the simple miracle of touch, of skin against skin, a silent conversation in a house that had been silent for too long. I learned the shape of her, the sharp line of her collarbone, the soft curve of her hip. She traced the old scars on my knuckles, the tense muscles in my shoulders. We were two lonely people who had found a temporary harbor in each other. It was more than comfort. It was a quiet act of defiance against the emptiness. A confirmation of life in the midst of so much loss. I woke to the pale light of dawn. For a moment, I didn't know where I was. The sheets smelled of her, clean and faintly floral. I was in her bed, her arm draped over my waist, her slow, even breaths a comfort against my back. The house was still. The rain had washed the world clean. I lay there, listening to the birds starting to sing outside, and a feeling I couldn't name bloomed in my chest. It wasn't just relief or satisfaction. It was a kind of peace. I had come here to fix a leak, a simple, mechanical problem. I'd followed the rules, brought the right tools. But the real problem had been something else entirely, something my tools were useless against. I had stayed. I had listened. I had held. And in doing so, I had fixed something far more important. Or maybe not fixed. Maybe fix was the wrong word. You can't fix grief. You can't patch a hole in a person's soul like it's a leaky pipe. All you can do is sit with them in the dark until the light comes back. All you can do is show them they're not drowning alone. Ilara stirred behind me, her fingers tightening slightly on my hip. She pressed a soft kiss to my shoulder blade. "Good morning," she whispered, her voice husky with sleep. I turned in her arms to face her. In the morning light, she looked different. The deep exhaustion in her eyes was still there, but it was softer around the edges. It was joined by something new. A tentative hope. "Morning," I said, my voice softer than I intended. I reached up and tucked a stray strand of silver and black hair behind her ear. "The sun's out," she smiled, a real, genuine smile that reached her storm-gray eyes. "Yes," she said. It is my toolbox was still sitting by her front door. The invoice was still unwritten in my back pocket. The job was, by all professional standards, incomplete. But as I lay there in her arms, in the quiet light of a new day, I knew I had done the most important work of my life. The leak upstairs was still there. It always would be. But it wasn't a flood anymore. It was just a part of the house, a room to be entered with reverence and love. And maybe, just maybe, it didn't have to be entered alone.